Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and welcome back to another lecture on Walk Magick, and today I'm going to be going over Liber Resh. So, Liber Resh fell Helios, subfigura 200. 200 being the value of Resh. The adorations of the sun, Liber Resh. In this video, I will go over not only how to practice this text, but I hope to explain points surrounding the text that I have not heard anyone else talk about in video form. What I mean is, I will answer the questions, why do we perform solar adorations? What does that entail? And how could you get the most out of that practice? To begin, in the Equinox Volume 1, Number 2, there is a short chapter called The 5 Adorations. It includes 5 prayers that are Arabic Islamic influenced. The creation of Liber Resh was probably inspired by the Islamic and by a Hindu form of solar adorations, though Islamic won't say it's adorations. Though I don't have any evidence firsthand from Crowley that the latter, Hindu solar adorations, is true, but it is a suspicion I hold. Crowley had great respect for Islam. He looked upon it as a very forceful type of worship. That every day Muslims perform 5 salah probably appealed greatly to Crowley, but being mandated by Liber L, quote, "Behold, the rituals of the old time are black. Let the evil ones be cast away, let the good ones be purged by the prophet. Then shall this knowledge go aright," end quote. I think Crowley chose to make a text that could worship the sun at its various intervals, mimicking how a Muslim does salah 5 times a day. So he wanted to incorporate some type of Thelemic worship with that base of multiple prayers multiple times a day. In a few different texts, such as 8 Lectures on Yoga, Crowley makes a statement that has stuck with me over the years. Quote, "There must be a definite routine of acts calculated to remind the student of the great work," end quote. Doing things like journaling after every practice, Liber Resh, saying will before meals, practicing Liber Jigorum, and saying the mantra Gayatri every evening upon seeing the moon, or performing Bhakti Yoga as outlined in Liber Astarte, where everything you do day in and day out is a first dedicated by prayer to your chosen deity. All of these things force your mind back upon the great work. It reminds you, if you do these practices that I just listed, Liber Resh, Liber Jigorum, saying will before meals, the mantra Gayatri, if you do these every single day, periodically throughout the day, you're going to push your mind back away from the distractions of life, back to the great work. And you're going to be reminded that you are supposed to be performing the great work, and it doesn't allow you to get fully distracted from that process. It is very easy to become distracted by life. Even putting off practices, whether on purpose or by accident, anything can take you away from performing the great work. Knowing that at certain times, periodically throughout your day, you have to be on time for a practice keeps you fixated upon performing the great work, and over time, this fine-tunes your mind to single-pointedness. Liber Resh is more than just facing the sun and saying a prayer. Too often, people perform what I call empty words and gestures and think they are doing magic. If energy is not moving, then something is horribly wrong. I will describe how to do this practice, but it is up to the magician to learn the trick of actually invoking energy. I will refer the newcomer back to my video on energy manipulation and psychic vampires. In that video, I describe body scans and how to intake energy. Similar to Pratyahara, begin by putting all of your consciousness into a single point in your body, say the top of your head. Then, see a thin white line, like a scanning machine, slowly move downward, bringing your consciousness with it, so that your whole conscious mind exists only on the point at which you are focused. Eventually, with enough practice, you will begin to feel prana as well, and you will be able to push that energy along with your consciousness. Moving a lot of energy to a single point in the proper way can even help with healing. From there, you can learn how to push energy out of your body from a single point. The hands are good for this because of the ease fingers have at directing attention. It is almost an unconscious infant human feature. Besides pushing energy out, you can then learn to intake energy or manipulate external energy, as is done in Reiki with hands-on healing. When you have all of that down, facing the sun during Resh, you can take in solar energy specifically. So now, next for practicing Resh is God form assumption. This is outlined in Liber O. We are all made up of not only a physical body, but a spiritual one as well. This subtle body can be seen as astral light, and astral light can be molded into any shape soever. For each of the 4 adorations, you shape your astral body in the form of the prescribed aspect of the sun, so Ra in the east, Ahathor in the south, Tum in the west, and Kepha in the north. By taking in solar energy while assuming that God form, you are charging and bringing to life the God form within you. So before going into the technical nuances of the practice, I want to speak about the sun and worshiping it. The base of life on Earth is carbon. DNA and RNA are carbon-based. Fats and sugars carbon-based. This carbon, so far as we can tell by science, came from supernova. Hydrogen was the first chemical formed after the Big Bang, giving way to lithium, helium, and then stars. That's the short of it. Eventually, denser chemicals were formed. Here, on Earth, the sun is the most important factor for life. Its photons feed plant life through photosynthesis, allowing complex sugars to be made to feed the plant. Plants are then consumed, as are the animals who consume the plants. The energy feeding us is literally coming from sunlight, if you look at it from this perspective. We are condensed, highly evolved stardust, fed by solar energy. The sun is a wonderful symbol for the divine light. It is the biggest and brightest thing, the hottest, and it's even life-giving. It is the divine light made into a physical object. The sun is the center of our solar system, much as our hearts, which pump nutrients through our body, is the center of our beings. As above, so below. As we spiral around the sun on Earth, the change of season causes variations in vegetation, allowing for more species to have evolved on this planet. Now, I always wondered how, if there were inanimate chemicals, as known on the periodic table, how did life emerge from these little pieces of atomic particles that are not animate and conscious like we are? How did single-cell organisms evolve from star stuff and evolve into beings like the mammals of today? My answer, and I think the Kabbalists and quantum physicists would agree, is that all particles of atoms, those seemingly infinite amount of tiny building blocks of the universe, are actually all conscious, or at least guided by a consciousness, however you'd prefer to word it. With the advent of quantum physics, the double-slit experiment basically proves that particles are aware of whether or not they are being viewed and react accordingly. They either act like particles or waves, depending on whether or not scientists are observing them. I make the argument, and I think animists would agree, everything from humans to animals to vegetation to rocks, planets, stars, everything all came from one source, and that source is still ever present. I don't think it is purposely guiding life like the Christians would believe of God, but I do believe that with the right state of trance, you can tap into that God consciousness, that it's still there. The open eye experience allows Magi and Yogi to commune with that highest form of consciousness, making them one with all things, something like the highest states of samadhi. So, if all of this is true, the sun has its own consciousness. The next time you're doing Liber Resh, keep in mind that the sun is made up of particles just like you, and those particles all carry somewhere within them a seed of God consciousness which can be tapped into. You could even find yourself one with Saul with enough practice. So, what actually happens when you perform Resh? Well, there are short-term and long-term effects. If you do Resh perfectly and are getting the fullest effects from the adorations, almost immediately you will begin to feel energized. Sol is a royal energy, perhaps not as fast as Mars or Aries energy, but it still has a kick. You will literally be brighter. With enough practice, you may even take on the glow of the illuminated ones. Your sleep schedule may be disturbed, so you might find yourself sluggish at times from lack of sleep, but finding ways to nap or rest will cure this. In the long term, you should connect with the sun. You will start to know at all times where the sun is in its orbit, able to locate it not only because you have a general knowledge of where it is at what time of day, but you may begin to almost feel a magnetic charge of where the sun is, without even knowing what direction you are facing. Say if you're underground in the subway, you will be able to tell, oh, the sun's, I feel some type of energy that feels like solar energy, and it's coming from this direction. And with enough practice, you'll probably be right. The next long-term effect is that you will start to wake up just before sunrise from your nightly slumber. You will spontaneously be aware that it is a few minutes until your next adoration. Then you should gain a sort of regalness to your being. You will become kingly, a being connected with the spirit of Sol. So finally, let's go over the actual practice. Every Thelemite should do these 4 daily adorations, in my opinion, regardless of grade or lack thereof. Crowley writes in the Confessions that to get the ultimate effect of this ritual, they should be performed in the desert under the sun. Of course, this is not possible for all of us. If possible, we should do it outside, and if that is also impossible, then it should be done in your temple or wherever you happen to be. If you cannot physically see the sun, then you visualize it. Whether you're in a crowded market or alone, you should stop at the exact moment of the adoration and do it regardless of who is watching. It's probably a good thing for mundane people to get exposure to real Thelemite practices. Line 1 from Liber Resh, quote, "Let him greet the sun at dawn facing east, giving the sign of his grade," end quote. There is much debate about this wording. Some Thelemites do not belong to AA, and thus do not have a grade. In this case, it is highly recommended that you position yourself on the cross-section of Pe and Samek on the Tree of Life. So, facing east for sunrise, you give the sign of Osiris Slain, because you are facing Tefereth. At noon, facing south, thus Netzach, the sign of fire. West at sunset is Yesod, thus the sign of air. At midnight, Hod, the sign of water. That is for the first adoration. The second adoration, I always give the sign of Osiris Risen. If you're in AA, you use your actual grade sign for the first adoration, and Osiris Risen for the second adoration. I've also heard that if you're not in AA, you could give the sign of the Emperor for all 4 adorations, followed by the sign of silence when you complete the adoration. If you feel like that's more comfortable for you, do that, since that's like a probationer, not really fully admitted into AA grade sign. That's totally fine if you feel comfortable with that. Otherwise, use the 4 elemental, the sign of Osiris Slain, fire, air, and water. Use those grade signs otherwise. The 4 quarters, east, south, west, and north, are perfect points for phases of the sun through a single day. Crowley attributed Ra to the rising sun, which to me seems obvious why. It's a very powerful sun figure, and the rising sun is one of the most important symbols of the sun. Ahathor he attributed to the southern highest point of the sun, Tum to the setting sun in the west, and Kefra to midnight when the sun is on the other side of earth. Ra is always the lord of the morning. Ahathor for Netzach in the south makes sense since it's a very fiery sphere. It also balances the masculine and feminine aspects of the sun by giving the highest point of the sun's daily orbit to a goddess. Tum is attributed to the west, for he has long been associated with the setting sun and has an airy nature. And finally, Kefra in the north, when the night has come. Kefra, by mythology, pushes the sun like a dung beetle does feces, bringing it to the horizon in the east each night. When performing the godform assumption of these 4 deities, you follow the instructions as per Liber O, which I'll now paraphrase. So basically, you want to take a second, pause, see your inner body of light, this astral light that's literally shaped like your physical body. With your eyes closed or open, whatever's comfortable for you, see the light the astral light that's inside of you start to morph into the shape and colors of the deity that you are assuming. So for a Hathor, you want to see the crescent moon on top of your head with the sun disk, and you want to see yourself dressed in Egyptian garb. You could find images and hieroglyphics online of what she looks like, perhaps with some type of loincloth, whether open breast or some type of corset or dress on, whatever you feel is comfortable that you see pictures of her wearing. Change the astral light in your body to look like that, and then hold it. Otherwise, follow Liber O for a more concise Crowleyan breakdown of how to do godform assumptions. Lastly, you should know about visuals during the recitation of the adorations. What I do is this. Visualize both yourself and the godform assumed, then see the sun replaced with the ship of Ra. Ra is seated at the helm and Tahuti is at its prow, the tip of the ship, watching where the ship is headed. So for the second adoration, let's go through piecemeal. Quote, unity uttermost showed. This is less visual and more feeling. I am united with the sun, or Ra, or HGA, or Kether. Depends on how I'm feeling. You must know the feeling of which of these you are uniting with, and bring upon your being that feeling. Quote, I adore the might of thy breath, supreme and terrible God, who makest the gods in death to tremble before thee. I adore thee. The sun, though worshipped as a life-giving symbol of deity, is actually a very brutal thing. If it were not for the Earth's magnetic field, the planet would be scorched and the sun would kill us. We cannot even look upon the sun directly without damaging our eyes. It is a powerful, terrible thing. As deadly as it is, we are also totally dependent upon it. To have life is to court death. In chapter 2 of Liber Resh, quote, I am the flame that burns in every heart of man and in the core of every star. I am life and the giver of life, yet therefore is the knowledge of me the knowledge of death, end quote. The heart is Tiferet, the sun. To know life is to know death, as two sides of the same coin. Birth and death are merely two changes of energy and matter, neither to be feared or reviled, but to be enjoyed and celebrated. See the blue equinox for more on this. Quote, appear on the throne of Ra, open the ways of the Ku, lighten the ways of the Ka, the waves of the Kabs run through, to stir me or still me, Om, let it fill me. Also intone Om, don't just say it as I just did. Here, I focused on my heart center a little. For this is all a meditation on the connection of the heart and sun. Hadid I see as the Ka, a spark of light which is in the heart, but within the Kabs, a star of light surrounding him. The Ku I see as my external body, ego, and aura. I open the ways of the Ku by identifying not with the body, but piercing deeper into my heart center, the Kabs, and allowing the spark of Hadid, of Hadid's light, a single point of consciousness, to burn brightly. I use let it fill me. I don't care what stance you have, and I'll not persuade anyone with this video. Maybe I'll make a video on that at a later time. Quote, the light is mine, its rays consume me. I have made a secret door into the house of Ra and tomb of Kephra and of Ahathor. Here, I focus on the light of the previous verses, as well as the physical sunlight. I sometimes visualize 4 doors at the quarters where spiritual light from the sun can come through into my being and energize me. Quote, I am thy Dib and Omentu, the prophet Ankafna Kansu. By Beznamot my breast I beat, by wise Tanesh I weave my spell. Here, I sometimes physically change my stance from Osiris Risen to the stance of Ankafna Kansu as depicted on the Stele of Revealing. Beznamot and wise Tanesh are the parents of Ankafna Kansu. In the AA ritual, passing through the Duat, we are instructed that they are figures clothed in flesh who represent Nuit and Hadid. I suppose anyone's physical parents can do the same for them in the proper context, but on true spiritual quest, parental indoctrination usually has to be overcome in order to make progress on one's path. See Liber Resh, or the verse from the Bible by Yahashua, quote, let the dead bury the dead, end quote. Quote, show thy star splendor, O Nuit, bid me within thine house to dwell, O winged snake of light, Hadid, abide with me, Ra Hor Kuit. At these last lines, I visualize myself in the Stele of Revealing. The altar and Horus before me, on his throne, Hadid above us, and Nuit arched for love around everything. The more fluid, the better. Horus has even acted on his own with various facial movements indicating being pleased or agreeable, and having some type of feelings that expresses those two things. All of this should be 3-dimensional, not flat like on the Stele, obviously. So, to walk through the practice, let's use Sunrise Resh as an example. You should banish with the lesser pentagram and hexagram rituals, then stand facing east, watching the horizon, outside an open landscape if possible. If not, then where you are visualizing the sun slowly rise. Take your time. Enjoy and savor the experience. Then, give the proper sign of the quarter. For non-AA members, in the east again is Osiris slain. Assume the God form. Make sure your visualizations are perfect. Begin to recite the first adoration. After that's done, give the sign of silence. Pause on the sign of silence to allow your aura to crystallize. Then, give the sign of Osiris Risen and recite the second adoration, giving a closing sign of silence, and it is done. There's one more thing to cover, though, and that is in verse 5, quote, "And after each of these invocations thou shalt give the sign of silence, and afterwards thou shalt perform the adoration that is taught to thee by thy superior," which is the second adoration, or sometimes it's the ship from the Gnostic Mass. Sometimes that's taught to probationers or to neophytes. Otherwise, do the adoration from that I just broke down above from the Stele of Revealing. "And then do thou compose thyself to holy meditation," end quote. For holy meditation, what I suggest is anything from asana, pranayama, basically Liber Eve, so that includes dharana or physical clairvoyance, or an invocation such as the Bornless One, or any other invocation that you feel comfortable with if you're working with a specific planet. Do that invocation as a meditation. Or you could do something simple, such as read a chapter of a holy book and meditate on what you just read. After that, do your journaling. That's basically it. In closing, all I can say is do Liber Resh. Don't put it off. Start immediately. Do it for no less than 6 months at a time, every day, 4 times a day. If you forget and you're late, do it late. Don't say, well, I'll put it off later. I find that not doing a certain quarter or only doing one quarter every single day, and like let's say every day you just feel like doing the south quarter, you're opening that southern energy, and it's an aspect of the sun that it has an elemental aspect because of the earthly quarter, and you start to invoke that type of elemental solar energy, and it can make you unstable if you're not doing all 4. Always do all 4, even if it's late. You don't want to find yourself unstable. Do this practice for a year or longer. Just keep doing it. You'll know when you got the right effects from it. The effects are well worth the time you put into it. Love is the law. Love under will. I'll catch you in the next one.